What if Machiavelli's most powerful lesson was actually about knowing when to remain completely silent? In an age where we're compelled to share every thought and opinion, those who master the discipline of strategic silence gain a powerful advantage. The most successful people in boardrooms and political arenas aren't necessarily the most skilled or intelligent. They're the ones who understand which truths to reveal and which to keep hidden, leveraging silence as their ultimate weapon. If you're ready to dive deeper into the hidden tactics of power and influence, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more insights that uncover the rules of the game. Most people don't even know they're playing. What if everything you thought you knew about Machiavelli was shaped by those who feared his insights? His name conjures images of manipulation, cruelty, and ruthless pragmatism. But history has a way of transforming complex figures into caricatures, especially when their ideas challenge the comfortable illusions we prefer to maintain about power. Florence, 1498. A vibrant republic at the heart of the Renaissance. Among its citizens walks Niccolò Machiavelli, not yet the notorious figure he would become, but a passionate believer in republican governance. The city-state pulses with artistic and intellectual energy, streets alive with the footsteps of artists and merchants, yet remains vulnerable like a jewel coveted by powerful neighbors. The Medici family, who had controlled Florence for decades, has been temporarily expelled, and Machiavelli seizes this opportunity, securing a position in the new Republican government. For 14 years, he serves as a diplomat and civil servant, his missions taking him across Italy's fractured political landscape, a complex chessboard where one wrong move could spell disaster for an entire city-state. Unlike philosophers who theorized from comfortable studies, Machiavelli's education comes through direct observation of power's raw mechanics. He negotiates with popes, studies military tactics, and witnesses the intricate dance of alliances that define Renaissance politics. Then comes 1512. The Republic falls. The political chessboard shifts dramatically as Spanish troops help restore the Medici to power, and Machiavelli's world collapses. His idealistic vision of republican governance crashes against the hard reality of power politics. Suspected of conspiracy against the new regime, he is arrested, tortured, and eventually exiled to his small property outside Florence. This dramatic fall from grace would fuel his most enduring work. In his rustic exile, Machiavelli changes into formal clothes each evening before entering his study to commune with the ancient minds through their books. Here, surrounded by silence instead of diplomatic bustle, he distills his observations into The Prince, a slim volume emerging from patriotic anguish. His intention was not creating a handbook for tyrants, but revealing power's mechanisms with unflinching clarity. Consider the context. Italy lay vulnerable, frequently invaded by foreign powers. Machiavelli had watched idealistic leaders fail to protect their citizens because they refused to see reality. Where his contemporaries clung to lofty moral ideals divorced from practical governance, Machiavelli documented the harsh truths he had witnessed. His work stood in stark contrast to political treatises describing how leaders should behave in an ideal world. The true tragedy of Machiavelli lies in this contradiction. A republican forced by circumstance to articulate how princely power functions. He saw that conventional morality often failed as a guide to effective leadership. The Medici maintained control through strategic balance of severity and restraint. Cesare Borgia secured territories through calculated demonstrations of force followed by efficient governance. Machiavelli's crime was removing the comfortable veil of hypocrisy that shrouded political discourse. When he wrote that a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good, he was acknowledging reality with the sobriety of someone who had seen idealistic leaders fail repeatedly. His name became synonymous with evil because he articulated truths about human behavior that people preferred to deny. By suggesting that political necessity sometimes required actions that conventional morality condemned, he challenged the comforting fiction that good governance and traditional virtue always aligned. Machiavelli's greatest insight wasn't promoting cruelty, but recognizing that understanding human nature, in all its flawed reality, is the foundation of effective leadership. He saw that people respond to incentives, fear loss more than they desire gain, and often act from self-interest rather than principle. Understanding human nature as Machiavelli did reveals an uncomfortable truth about power that contradicts our modern obsession with transparency and communication. In an age where we compulsively share thoughts, feelings, and intentions, we've forgotten what Renaissance power brokers understood instinctively: that every unnecessary word spoken represents a small surrender of advantage. In today's open world, silence is a rare and potent weapon. We're told that openness builds trust, that transparency creates connection, and that constant communication demonstrates competence. Yet Machiavelli observed something entirely different. Those who speak unnecessarily create vulnerabilities that their more reserved counterparts avoid. What appears as openness often functions as a strategic liability. Unnecessary speech creates three distinct disadvantages. It generates binding commitments that make any deviation appear as dishonesty. It exposes your thinking process and limitations, and it diminishes your mystique and authority. Each word beyond necessity hands power to others. We see this principle operating clearly among modern leaders. Steve Jobs created an aura of mystery that amplified Apple's cultural impact through calculated silence about future products and internal processes. Vladimir Putin employs prolonged silences during negotiations, forcing others to nervously fill the void with concessions. Their power derives from what they withhold. This pattern repeats throughout history. Queen Elizabeth I maintained her authority during religious turmoil through her famous ambiguity on theological matters. Like Jobs, centuries later, she understood that definitive declarations would limit her flexibility and authority. Meanwhile, leaders who couldn't resist speaking, like Napoleon with his revealing bulletins, or Nixon with his recorded conversations, created evidence that eventually undermined their power. The strategic advantage of silence creates information asymmetry. Imagine a boardroom negotiation where one executive remains measured and selective with comments while her counterpart eagerly explains his entire position. By the meeting's end, she knows his constraints, priorities, and limits, while he has learned little about hers. This asymmetry functions as currency in the economy of influence. When you remain silent, others fill the void with their own thoughts, inadvertently revealing their positions and fears. You've likely experienced this dynamic yourself. In negotiations, the party who speaks first typically concedes ground. In relationships, the constant talker reveals vulnerabilities while learning little about the reserved listener. In competitive scenarios, those who announce their strategies before execution underperform relative to their capabilities. This principle extends beyond formal power structures into daily interactions. The colleague who dominates every meeting, the friend who overshares on social media, the negotiator who fills uncomfortable silences, each unknowingly surrenders advantage without securing equivalent value. Machiavellian silence takes three distinct forms: information-gathering silence, allowing others to reveal their thoughts before disclosing your own; authority-building silence, leveraging the human tendency to fill information gaps with assumptions; and ambiguity. Preserving silence, maintaining multiple interpretations of your position to appeal to different audiences. What Machiavelli identified has become even more relevant today. We've fallen into the transparency trap, the belief that sharing more automatically creates advantage. In professional settings, this manifests as prematurely sharing works in progress or revealing negotiating positions before understanding the other side's constraints. In personal relationships, it appears as unnecessary confessions or detailed sharing of future plans. Each of these behaviors represents strategic missteps that surrender power without securing commensurate benefits. The transparent person becomes predictable, manipulable, and ordinary, qualities that undermine influence rather than enhance it. In mastering strategic silence, we reclaim the power that our communication culture encourages us to give away. The strategic silence that gives leaders their advantage is merely the foundation for a far more disturbing Machiavellian insight, one that threatens our cherished notions about how leadership should function. While we celebrate transparency as a virtue, Machiavelli identified an even more disturbing truth about human motivation that modern leadership books carefully avoid mentioning. It is safer to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. This principle strikes at the core of our modern sensibilities. We want to believe that the best leaders inspire through connection, vulnerability, and mutual respect. We celebrate approachable and kind leaders. Yet throughout history, this observation has proven accurate across disparate cultures, revealing something fundamental about human psychology that we resist acknowledging. The principle unsettles us because it contradicts our aspirational view of human nature. We prefer to see ourselves motivated by higher impulses, loyalty, gratitude, and shared purpose. Machiavelli recognized that beneath noble intentions lies pragmatic self-interest that responds more consistently to consequences than to emotional bonds. Fear creates accountability in behavior, while love operates on personal connection that shifts with circumstance or competing interests. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, he made the painful decision to cut numerous projects and lay off thousands. His severity created fear throughout the organization. Yet this decisive action saved the company from bankruptcy. As former Apple executive Guy Kawasaki noted, Steve's toughness wasn't personal, it was about demanding excellence. This approach transformed Apple into one of the world's most valuable companies. History showcases this principle effectively. Elizabeth I of England maintained stability through decades of turbulence by combining calculated shows of force with strategic mercy. She understood that occasional demonstrations of severity prevented the need for constant cruelty. This approach mirrors Angela Merkel's leadership in Germany, where her willingness to make unpopular decisions demonstrated that she prioritized necessity over immediate popularity, generating respect even when it didn't generate affection. According to a Harvard Business Review analysis of leadership effectiveness, leaders who prioritize tough decisions over popularity consistently outperform their counterparts in long-term organizational outcomes by nearly 24%. The skilled Machiavellian leader instills fear through predictable consequences rather than arbitrary punishment. People fear disappointing a leader they respect. They plot against a leader they despise. This distinction requires emotional intelligence, understanding exactly how far to push without crossing into resentment. In contemporary environments, CEOs who prioritize being liked often postpone necessary but unpopular decisions until conditions deteriorate beyond recovery. When Alan Mulally took over Ford in 2006, he established a culture where executives were expected to acknowledge problems transparently, with the understanding that failing to address those problems would have consequences. His approach created productive fear of disappointing the organization rather than hiding difficulties. What makes this principle difficult to accept is its contradiction of our narrative about ethical leadership. However, Machiavelli wasn't advocating for cruelty. He was recognizing human nature's tendency towards self-interest. Leaders who understand this can create systems that align individual interests with collective ones, using the fear of negative consequences while creating positive incentives for excellence. The effectiveness of fear doesn't stem from a desire to intimidate, but from recognition that humans respond to consequences. The most skilled leaders create environments where people fear disappointing standards rather than fearing the leader personally. This represents the difference between the crude Machiavellian who rules through threat and the sophisticated practitioner who understands that fear works best when arising from respect. While fear creates predictable behavior in followers, appearances shape how leaders themselves are perceived and judged. Have you ever wondered why we consistently elect politicians whose private actions contradict their public virtues? This paradox reveals one of Machiavelli's most enduring insights about human psychology, one that has quietly shaped every successful leadership career throughout history. Machiavelli recognized a fundamental truth that remains remarkably relevant today. The masses judge leaders by who they appear to be, not who they truly are. What he called the vulgar crowd is taken in by appearances rather than deeper realities, a cognitive bias that operates regardless of education level or social status. This insight reveals how human perception functions at its core. Managing a public image resembles curating an art exhibition. Leaders carefully select which aspects of themselves to display, which to modify, and which to keep hidden from view. Each public statement, appearance, or policy becomes another carefully positioned piece in their gallery of perception, designed to create a cohesive impression while the messier reality remains backstage. This insight directly challenges our contemporary obsession with authenticity. We've elevated being your true self to the highest virtue, yet our social and political systems operate on principles that make such transparency impractical. When leaders attempt complete authenticity, they often find themselves abandoned by the very people who demanded it, creating a practical necessity for the separation between public virtue and private action. Consider how this principle manifests in our modern world. We demand authenticity while simultaneously forcing leaders into impossible moral standards. We expect transparency while punishing those who reveal too much. The tendency to prioritize appearance over reality extends beyond our assessment of leaders. It's a fundamental feature of human psychology operating throughout our social lives. Take Microsoft's environmental initiatives as an example. The company makes bold public commitments about carbon neutrality and sustainability, earning praise and brand loyalty. Yet simultaneously, their lobbying efforts have sometimes worked against stronger environmental regulations that might impact their bottom line. This isn't necessarily hypocritical in Machiavelli's framework. It's the pragmatic separation between appearance and reality that effective power demands. Social media has transformed this dynamic. Platforms create unprecedented pressure for leaders to appear authentic while providing sophisticated tools for curating personas with precision.